Ninth Circuit. So the first lawsuit, I'll say, to that forest plan is being appealed to the Ninth Circuit. We came back, did a new biological opinion, issued that, and we're moving out with that, and we got a second lawsuit on that biological opinion. So we kind of simultaneously have two lawsuits going on of the new biological opinion and the old forest plan. Or I should say, how you guys get it? There's two lawsuits on the forest plan. I'll just put it that way. One of them's at the Ninth Circuit, one of them's at the district court. You can see where that shakes out. Both of them, a lot of it tied to grizzly bear and some other things going on. So just want to have that be a note. We did get out again this year and do our effectiveness for road closures. I think last year, Mark, we were at like 92, 93%. Looks like the preliminary numbers are around that 95% this year. So again, that's some good stroke of business for our effectiveness in terms of road closures. They are being fairly effective, although we do recognize that we can't get 100%. So that's going to continue to be ongoing work. We think it's important to continue to monitor that. And so appreciate Mark and his staff getting out there and doing that. We did bring on several bear rangers this year, which is kind of new for us. Pretty awesome. I'll say they visited over 300 campsites and campgrounds and made a lot of good public comment and kind of an educational side of the house. So I think that was, I anticipate, Mark, if we continue to get funding, then we'll continue to do that. I think that was a success this year. Again, kudos to the transition we had. We had a lot of interaction with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in terms of the new, how we're going to relocate bears and what have you, and that was a success. So kudos to Hillary and her staff and everybody in here, and just that coordination amongst kind of that new era. But I would say that was a pretty good success. We had a little bit of bumps in the road early on, but we're able to communicate well and work through that. So thanks for everybody with that. And the last thing I'll mention that should be on folks' radar is there was an act that was signed where the state lands, Lee, I think you're aware of this, but the state lands within the reservation boundary of the Salish Kootenai tribe are going to be, not all of them, but basically given back to the tribe. And then in exchange, the Forest Service will do a land exchange with the state to make the state whole on whatever acres they gave up, is how I understand it. So just, there's some ongoing stuff. Nothing's out for public review, but just, I want to get that on folks' radar. That was an act that was passed a couple years ago, if I remember right. And so there's some ongoing work going on with that. And we'll probably see some movement in the next year or two on that, at least for some public comment and whatnot, because we will have to go through DEPA. So just getting that on folks' radar. It looks to be around that 26,000 acres. That sound right, Lee? Give or take. We'll see where we land. That's all I have for Flathead. Next on is Lolo.
All right. Well, a lot of the same things for us that you've already heard, but some different things for us. Well, we are reconsulting on our plan, and that should be coming through. We're hoping pretty soon. Fish and Wildlife Service biological opinion. The food storage order, of course, we work from that. Relocation is another piece. We have an agreement that's almost ready to go to the Fish and Wildlife Service, I'm hoping. And I've talked to our regional office about that. We're just trying to get that review in place. So that should be definitely this winter, we should be getting that into place. I want to thank everyone who helps the forest for sure. And just, I know that our bios have worked with Jamie and Aaron Edge, certainly up in the Sealy area, to reduce attractants and putting out some RAC money, the Resource Advisory Committee money on the ground. So that's really great to get that kind of cooperation. And then also our bios helped with Fish and Wildlife Service on genetic sample collection. That's it for me.
Okay. That's my place, Emily.
Sure. Kurt already covered food storage and Dave covered the couple of recreation developments that I thought folks would be interested in. And Kiara has actually joined us online. So I was going to turn it over to Kiara to talk about some of the information and education stuff we've been doing over the last year.
Thanks, Emily. So our forest is fortunate to have a nonprofit that we work very closely with, Montana Discovery Foundation. They were successful at receiving one of the NCDE Information Education and Outreach Committee grants last year. And so we were able to do a lot of outreach in Red Ants Pants Festival, the Scapegoat 50th, using that bear trailer and basically showing different groups of people how to use bear spray with that inert spray, and talking about the new food storage order in effect, and just kind of raising, education around that. They were also successful at obtaining another 8,000 from Missouri River RAC. And so that's going to enable them to do an inventory of all of our signage, look at opportunities to maybe do a bear canister loaner program, pilot something like that, do education with our staff on how to carry bear spray and talk to the public about it. And then I guess look for areas to improve signage so that it's uniform across the forest. No matter how you enter, you are seeing consistent wording and signage. So yes, there are main means of kind of doing the education on our forest, but it's been working fairly well for us. All I have.
Yeah. Dave, anything to add?
No, it's been great working with Ben and the really patient stuff, and grateful for Chad and having me on the tracking effort in the backcountry. So that's just been riding around, trying to make contact with folks and see hikers hiking with their earbuds in. They're trail, so that's interesting.
Yes,
Was it?
Seth.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it short as well. What everyone else mentioned, did I just want to take the opportunity to just thank everybody for the different organizations that are helping us as we try to help others mentioned, kind of teach people to learn to live with bears where they are. And a lot of our efforts, the information and education that go along with that. We have a bear ranger that's been extremely successful, been doing school groups and working with FWP in the communities. Spent 3 days at the Lincoln County Fair. Things are going really well, and as far as that coordination, and I'm very interested as we hear about the next steps and what some of those might look like to carry that out and do working with some more of our partners, maybe at the county level and others to improve those efforts. I guess a couple other things to mention, the range rider program that we've been working with, a lot of our forest range permittees, through Wildlife Services continues to be very successful, and I think a good example of learning to live with bears, and kind of shifting a little bit of culture. I think that's one that's been really successful, and I know that defenders and others have supported that program as well, and it's much appreciated. And with our range permittees as well, being very supportive of that. We will be jumping into our over snow vehicle use mapping, and so our transportation planning for over snow use probably starting next spring. And Kurt has mentioned some of the other things that are going on with the land use or the potential land changes. Closure monitoring has been another one we've been very working very hard at. Monitoring those closures and gate closures, and been pretty successful at. And I guess just appreciate the support from the IGBC for the programs we've been pushing forward. Lastly, as we do sit between the Kamiak and or with a foot on each ecosystem, NCDE and Kamiak, and then land in between. The discussions about working together on information education and conservation and strategy planning. Very interesting for us. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott, do you have anything from the regional office?
Just couple things, recognizing that most of the the work on our own that happens through the forest, so you guys, the regional office tries to assist where we can, and certainly been parts of those conversations on relocation plans and communication plans. We do have, through Lydia Allen, our endangered sensitive species program, they, lead some working group on working with Fish and Wildlife Service. Excuse me, and and grizzly bear researchers on helping to develop some new guidance on, effects analysis for non-notified wreck. We're trying to make progress on how to analyze effects on bears outside recovery zones in those in-between areas. And providing some updated guidance on helicopter use and rolling drone use into that, and as far as effects to bears on that. So those are some ongoing efforts from the RO. I'd also say relative to the food storage orders that folks have mentioned, I think that's a really great stroke that the NCDE was able to get consistent on. I also think Greater Yellowstone has been working toward that same end, and they've made their food storage orders consistent amongst the forests in the GYE. Those two groups of food storage orders used to have more consistency amongst themselves, but they were pretty inconsistent between NCDE and the GYE, and with these new these new ecosystem consistencies that have been worked on. The two sides have become much closer together than they were in the past. I think the NCDE no longer allows the nighttime attended storage, which was not allowed in the Yellowstone, and Yellowstone and allows electric fence use, which was previously not allowed there, but was allowed in the NCDE. So those were two of the bigger differences between those ecosystem food storage orders. And now they're not identical yet, but they're very much closer than they were. I think that's a good story. That's all I got.
Thanks, Scott. CSKT is carry on.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Right. So I am with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and we have had over the last year and a half, a few departmental transitions and retirements. And so kind of traditionally on this team, you guys may be more familiar with, Dale Becker and Stacy Corville. They were sort of our representatives in the past. And so with some retirements and some kind of departmental shuffling, I've kind of moved into this role, and then Peyton Adams has kind of moved into this team as well in differing or in various capacities. So we spent a lot of this year, thankfully I had worked closely with Dale and Stacy in the past in a lot of the NCDE grizzly bear work, and so I was fairly familiar with it. But I think we spent a lot of this year just kind of settling into our new positions and roles. And I'll just give a few brief highlights of some of the things that we've been working on, identified as some conflict concerns and sort of some future projects we've got going on as well. So one of our big one and main focus is the Highway 93 connectivity. We want to increase that permeability of grizzly bears across the highway. And so we've worked in a few different efforts to help future reconstruction projects, kind of help identify, and I think Hillary touched a bit on that, some of the most effective areas for crossing and how to make sure and ensure that we, any reconstruction projects that coming forth, that they're done so in a way that allows for maximizing that connectivity in those areas. Alongside that, we are also working on a literature review study right now, where we're looking at what crossing structures are most effective, so that we can look at some of our existing structures that aren't facilitating females with cubs as much as we would like, so that we're looking at what can we do to some of these wildlife crossing structures to help increase that effectiveness. So we've got a study going on that should kind of wrap up this winter, and so we should be able to hopefully present on that at the spring meeting. We also put together, and then Peyton and Peyton used them quite a bit this season, some non-lethal predator control loaner kits to help loan out to the public and help alleviate some of those electric fencing or other just main kind of conflict prevention needs. Looking to the future, so we're working with a few different agencies on maybe looking into implementing some Bear Smart community pilot projects with some of our towns that do see quite a bit of predominantly black bear conflicts, but are definitely areas where grizzly bears are or maybe moving into in the future. And so we want to really in those communities just kind of empower them to help get ahead of and reduce conflict in their areas. So we're going to be working with people and carnivores on maybe getting some pilot towns or pilot areas for some of those Bear Smart projects. And then we're also working with people and carnivores on trying to increase our bear spray program into some of the cherry orchards around Flathead Lake, working with some of the cherry pickers in the summer. The last couple of years, we've had some incidents where bear conflicts, in those environments have gotten high. And so we're hoping to help, again, empower those orchard owners to reduce conflict as much as possible during that season. And then the last thing that we're really looking at are hip camps. So that's something that started similar to Airbnb, but something that started to become concern for conflicts in really high bear use areas where we have folks coming to the area and camping right next to riparian corridors that may not know that bears are even in the area. And so we're really working again with people and carnivores on that to try and identify some ways to maybe help mitigate some of those potential conflicts there and kind of maybe get ahead of some issues. I think that kind of touches on most of what Peyton didn't kind of discuss yesterday. So I think I will end it there. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, Jeff, it sounds like Buzz isn't on. Are you?
Yeah, just some things that we have going on this year. I've been working on the composting site to dump all of our carcasses in. I have 2 areas set aside that I could use, one in the summer, more remote, and one during the winter where we can access it easier. We had the Oakland Zoo, they work really close with our tribe. They donated some bear spray. We used to sell it for $5 a can, and that was something Dan started 5 years ago. And the money for that ran out. We ran out of bear spray, but they ended up kind of, I don't remember how much they gave us. It's 300 cans or something. So we got that going. And then they were talking about the Bear Smart communities. I've been working really well with the community installation, kind of that outlying area, really hit hard this year. One of the biggest challenges was the solid waste issues and bear-proof trash cans getting chewed up over time. Got a few bears that figured out if they chewed the hinges off the lids, kind of getting to be pretty expensive there for us. A lot of signages, pullouts and everything. We've been working on that and working with a lot of these rental cabins and Airbnbs that we already goes to actually have signs and stuff in these remote areas where there are bears to, just to use some education material. That's about all we have for now.
So, thanks, Jeff. Questions? Okay, switching gears, Craig.
All right, so I'll give a real quick overview or update for the agency, but one thing I'd like the committee to think about. So what I'm discussing as far as numbers and that are pretty much traditional ranches, so it's not the backyard chickens or that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, in this day and age, there's not a bunch of more family ranches coming on board. There's not families going out buying 300, 500 cows and getting a couple thousand acres and having place. So the numbers that I have isn't an increase in that type of exposure to the bear. What it is I want, I guess, just to think about what are the metrics for reducing bear human conflicts? Because we're seeing an increase, but like Cecily said, that just means there's more bears more areas, more conflicts is actually kind of a success if you look at it, because there's more bears out there to cause conflicts. Now, I know we all want to reduce that, but we also are putting in more effort. There's more documentation. And I just want to be cautious on what our metrics are on that goal to reduce conflicts. With that being said, I just did a 30,000 foot view of our numbers in the last 15 years in 5-year chunks, just to kind of give I guess, to show where conflicts for livestock are. So in 2007 to 11, we responded to 89 properties. There was $200,000 in damage. It was 457 visits and 35 bears were handled. In that next 5 years, 2012 to 17, there was 127 properties, almost $700,000 in damage, 718 visits, and 38 bears were handled, or whatever. And then this last 5 years, from 18 to 22, there's been 245 properties, over $2 million in damage, 2,555 visits, and 87 bears handled. So I want to kind of preface that on the metrics for that. So as far as our staffing, we're pretty much fully staffed. There's a few holes. There's 10 full-time specialists that can do investigation management. We have 2 8-month seasonals that assist in all aspects. We also have a side that's prevention, and that's just due to funding. They only do prevention. They don't do management side of stuff. This last season, we had 3 range riders. Next year we'll have 4. We're looking at Adam Baca, who was the first prevention specialist that did nothing but flagery and electric fencing, was based out of Missoula. He took a job in Colorado. So we're really excited to have Chrissy here. We actually moved that position to Kalispell instead of Missoula. So she's been on 2 months and just biting at the bit to go. So super excited. As Jim said, that's the future right there. So anyhow, he also had another full-time fencer, diamond running crane, over on the Blackfeet Reservation. He resigned this year. He had to focus on working at his own ranch and not having 2 full-time jobs. So, and like Jeff said, we sold one of his bear crew folks, Peter Tasty. He actually was one of our range riders up there, and now he's going to come on Monday, and he'll probably do some of the fencing for us too. So we'll have to backfill. That's one position that we've got to backfill. We'll have a full-time fencer up there, do a lot of 4-H stuff. That's kind of the direction of that fencing, is kind of what we're looking at. We're potentially looking at adding a 3rd fencer. So that would make it, 4 or 7 full-time prevention folks here in Montana. So anyhow, and it's really not fair to the other specialists that do management, because they also do prevention. One example, right when Diamond resigned, we had a pretty large permanent fence to put around a stack yard. So everybody knows in drought, you still have to feed cows. There's not enough hay. Producers are trying to figure out ways to stay in business. So one producer is actually feeding a bunch of grain out of their haystack, and it was very, very palatable to bears. It was all fed out. The haystack was left open. There was nothing but what was residual on the ground, and there was so much bear activity going into that hay yard. It was unbelievable. So working with Hillary, and thanks a bunch to everybody who came out and helped, we pulled, including myself, 5 full-time specialists that aren't in the prevention side to erect this fence before more grain was put in for the winter feeding of the cows. Took 2 days, we put it up, and it wasn't a day, it was hours before the first bear came in and tested it, got zapped on the nose, cool video, all that stuff. Then they started digging, we put hangers down, and it took 17 days until the bear dug under and got access to not even the new grain that was there. And the grain that's coming is also mixed with Carol syrup, some other stuff. I mean, I told them I wanted them to save me a 5-gallon barrel so I could use it for bait to catch bears in other places. So anyhow, I just want to say that, as a program as a whole, we're doing more, and it's just, like the Lewistown area. There's all, Lewistown, Fergus County has the second highest number of cattle in it in the state of Montana, second to Beaverhead. And so, there's not new places coming, but the expansion of bears, there's gonna be an expansion works. Anyway, that's what I got.
Quick question, Greg, those numbers, the 5-year increments, that was statewide?
Yeah.
And would you share those as your panel? Your preliminary report that you have somewhere?
Just a report that I just made.
Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't run it down.
Yeah, that's no problem.
All right, sounds like unless George, with Livestock Lost Board joined us, as I understand it, he wasn't able to make it. Okay, Joe.
Yeah, good morning. I'm going to stay off camera because I've been experiencing some of the same connectivity issues that John Waller has. So hopefully I don't lose you. I just had a lot to cover today, but I think what we kind of came up with this morning with all the discussion that's happened over the last couple of days regarding and related to transportation, I think maybe we need to grab some time on a future agenda to have a larger discussion that we can really dig into some of the details of what everything that everybody today and yesterday has been talking about, and the ties to transportation. How we can more strategically have a discussion that, really results in something that we can, move on. So, and as a real quick example, we were talking about, the increase in the human population in the Flathead, the residential development, recreational use of public lands. All those folks are getting to those lands and to bear habitat by state and federal highways. And then, from my side of it, all that residential growth, that equates to more heavy truck, construction traffic, which also translates into overloaded cement and gravel trucks. And, my personal discussions with guys that drive those trucks, they tend to overload them. And that's just a surefire way to reduce the service life of asphalt, bridges, and culverts. And then, with that, we've just got more repair and, reconstruction, and then the increased traffic, resulting increased risk of grizzly bear vehicle collisions. And then also, regarding the genetic augmentation discussion, my mind just kept going to, why not? We won't be able to mitigate connectivity across highways everywhere, and certainly not quickly. So, it's worth mentioning that, crossing structures for wildlife generally, it promotes safe wildlife passage, but it doesn't necessarily improve connectivity. Wildlife end up getting funneled to a few crossing opportunities instead of having an open and more passable landscape. So, through the last couple of days of discussion, there's just been a vast amount of information that's been tied to transportation related issues and tied to grizzly bears. So, and then also with the bear awareness and education discussion with Lori and Dylan, we've started distributing some education and awareness materials to some of our construction crews. So, that conversation triggered possibly the need of customizing a message for those construction crews. I mean, they're out there in the middle of bear habitat. They've got their porta potties set up. They've got their coolers set out there, set along their trucks and the various construction sites. You know, a couple of years ago on one of our construction cameras on the South Fork of Flathead, I ended up having to call the project manager because on the camera I could see a cooler that was left out on the construction site for several days. And that is a violation of one of our special provisions that's included in the contract documents. They're not allowed to do that. So there's so many things that are tied to grizzly bear management and conflict mitigation with transportation. So I did share that website link in the chat, and I encourage everybody to take a look at that. That's our public involvement website and shows active projects. And that does cover some of what I'll just really quickly go through here as far as our active projects. We also do have a research page that contains a tremendous amount of information on active and past research projects that MDT conducts. Two of the active ones are one project along 93 and 200 that's investigating effective electrified barriers at road approaches, like farm field approaches off the highway.
Joe, we may have lost you there. All right, Joe, we're gonna move on. Apologize. Katie.
Hey, everyone. I also apologize for not being there with you. I was worried about the winter weather with some other travel I had coming up right away. So thanks for making this available and letting me participate this way. I appreciate it. I don't have too much to share today other than that BLM is also working on standardized food storage orders, and I had a good chance to participate in the GYE working group that contributed some of those consistent Forest Service orders. So I would expect that we're going to be fairly close to those and strive for consistency as well. Our process is slightly different from the Forest Service in terms of getting those approved. We do have to publish a Federal Register notice for those, and they're considered supplemental rules. So I would expect that we're going to be working on final steps of those in the January timeframe and then getting those submitted for publication in the Federal Register shortly thereafter. And once those are published in the Federal Register, I think folks could expect less year-to-year variation in those just because of the process we go through to get those approved. So just wanted to share that. We're also continuing to get bear boxes out in some of our campgrounds. We did actually have some pretty significant black bear impacts in our super developed campsites near Helena this year on the lakes. So just an indicator that that is all pretty important. And then I think finally I would share Department of Interior is working actively on guidance related to traditional and indigenous ecological knowledge and how the agency should partner with tribes to incorporate their traditional knowledge, and no guidance out yet, but that should be coming within the next year. And I think we're all really excited to see that and look forward to incorporating that through work in this sort of setting as well as others. So that's it for BLM. Thank you.
Katie, any questions? All right, last but certainly not least, Chris, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me all right?
Gotcha.
I tried to turn my camera on, but apparently it's not working. So I don't have a whole lot to report from our last meeting. DNRC remains committed to the conservation strategy and our HCP and all that involves in terms of bears and impacts to bears. We contribute annually to Bear Ranger program and some of those education efforts. We monitor our
road closures, many hundreds of road closures and recovery zones every year. We're inspecting those for effectiveness and fixing ones that aren't effective. As I mentioned earlier today, we do face challenges with recreation, both developed and undeveloped, and in our case, some commercial recreation as well, and in terms of trying to educate and minimize conflicts. And in the future, I'm gonna be doing some more digging into some of our other land management, other than forest management, which has typically been where we've been concentrating on some of the conservation strategy items. But you know, we have some like developed, we have cabin sites, cabin leases, some of which are in the NCDE or really close to it, and I'm going to be looking at how we can get more compliance with food storage and reduce conflicts with bears in those areas as well. That's about it.
Excellent. Any questions for Chris? All right, that concludes our, unless there's any go backs, that concludes our agency updates. Any go backs. So how we're gonna do the public comment is very similar to the last go around. If you have a public comment, we're gonna ask you to try to keep it within 2 minutes and less. If you have questions, I'll jot down the questions and we'll try to get through all the comments. And if time allows, then we'll go back and answer any of the questions that we have. So that's the framework that we'll end up doing moving forward. If there's not a lot of comments and or questions, we'll have some more dialogue that can take place, but we will stick to the time frame that we have. Any questions among the members before we open it up? Okay, go ahead. And if you can, state your name. If you have an organization affiliation, by all means, state your organization. And then you're more than welcome to come up here. Again, try to keep it to 2 minutes and less if you can, and I'll jot down the questions.
Thanks for recognizing me. I'm Mike Bader. I'm an independent consultant here in Missoula. Just kind of wanted to reiterate some of the concerns that were raised earlier about activity inside the PCE, or what we used to call the recovery area. And just to go back in time a bit, there was a case that was settled in 1993. There was a petition to have the Fish and Wildlife Service designate critical habitat for grizzly bears. And at that time, it was the PCA was called the recovery area, and that was management situation 1. Zone 2, or the demographic monitoring area, was basically situation 2, and then there was situation 3. And the court ruled that the recovery areas were functionally equivalent to critical habitat designation. And the other thing under those MS rules, in MS1, conflicts were resolved in favor of the bear, period. And if that gets changed and the conflicts aren't resolved in favor of the bear, I think that's a recipe for population decline. And I think that the 1 in 10 rule inside the PCA is really badly flawed. And I think it really undermines the conservation strategy, makes it an inadequate regulatory mechanism in itself. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay. I was told I missed this room, so I'm going to try to focus over here and then I'll move over there.
Erin Edge with Defenders of Wildlife. I just wanted to go back to the Bear Smart community program again, quickly, and just say, I think there has been some discussion in the past about whether or not this is a role for IGBC, and I think it actually is really important to be seen. With our Bear Smart work in the Missoula area, you know, we were lucky to have Chris Rabin, Jamie Junkel, and been working on some of these issues since 2006. But in a lot of these communities, they don't have people like that, and the knowledge base is a little bit different. And so having something like the IGBC be the central database for where people can find templates or information or contacts or anything like that, even putting communities in touch with other communities to ask questions, is extremely important. And I think it is the role of the IGBC. And if there's an opportunity for the subcommittee to support that going forward with the executive committee, I think it's really important. I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, go ahead. I got you next, Keith.
My name is Claudia Narcisco, retired Forest Service. worked on the last forest plan revision, on the West Montana Planning Zone Forest Plan Revision Team, back in the early 2000s. And now I am on the board of an organization called the Flathead Lolo Bitter Citizen Task Force. And we have been doing quite a bit of work with connectivity and focusing on getting grizzly bears across the landscape. Pertaining to the discussion on recreation, and you mentioned it's not that you don't want to keep people out. I don't see it as a matter of keeping people out or letting people in. It's a matter of management. That's the responsibility that we're challenged with, or you guys are challenged with. We're all challenged with, but nevertheless. And it's about not only the amount of use, but the location of use and the type of use. It seems in my mind, you have a hiker walks 3 miles an hour. You have a bicyclist, mountain biker goes 8 miles an hour. You have a motorized bike, electric bike. All of this is accruing. So you need to be judicious and nuanced in how you select to allow use in any given area. For example, up in the Upper Swan, the recently released, is hot, in my mind, hot off the press, considering how long it took to do the forest plan revision for the Flathead National Forest. It's new. It's very clear that it says the Upper Swan is managed for connectivity. So, and the grizzly bear recovery is prioritized, black and white, period, right there in a simple statement. So the idea that so much time and effort and consideration has been going on to the excessive expansion of a historic lodge into this huge issue is really way out of bounds of what the forest plan intended. So the choice is amend the forest plan or follow the forest plan. And conservation strategy, in an earlier iteration of since my retirement, I was active in another organization, and going to give some homage to a person that helped us a lot, Brian Peck, and he reviewed and helped us write comments for the Flathead National Forest Plan revision. And we were not excited about the 1 in 10 rule at that particular time, but nevertheless, or standard, if that's what is existing. So the least we could do is respect it, follow it. If you don't want to follow it, revise the conservation strategy. To me, that seems the logical and the only choice you have. So that pretty much, the funding. The fellow over here mentioned the influx of funding. And I don't, we hear about it in the news and stuff, but now everybody has to go out and find ways to spend that money. Well, how about spending money in management? Jane, you mentioned, we need to, reduce. When I was with the Forest Service in another job, I worked on roads a lot, and we had a ranking system for the roads. It was like we could encourage use of the road, discourage use of the road, allow use of the road, and prohibit use. And each one had different mechanisms that we could do that with. And is it perfect? No, nothing is perfect. There's still violations, there's still problems, but at least there was a way. So certain areas, we need to discourage use. We certainly should discourage motorized use or even electric bike use because of the expanded impact of each of these things. So put some of that money that you get to management. You don't have to increase recreation and allow a free-for-all on the public lands. Okay, the second point I wanted to make is about connectivity and augmentation. And you might already have something like this, but it's not transparent to me. But some type of screening framework. There are a lot of issues about connectivity. I mean, there's, protecting our suitable and really high quality habitat. You talk about highways, talk about subdivisions, blah, 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 private lands. But for what we have, it seems like we're picking up bears and moving non-problem bears, non-conflict bears that are just wandering across the landscape and moving them back from where they came. Well, that's a clear deterrent to connectivity. So is there a framework for how you assess whether or not to monitor the bear or movement? You know, maybe make the people in the area feel a little bit more comfortable while the bear is even escorted through, who knows? But allowing natural connectivity, you know, by not reversing a bear's dispersal to another, you know, recovery area. And it seems like some bears even get on the other side of I-90. That's a huge jump. So why the heck do we put picking them up and bringing them back? You know, it's just like ridiculous. So, and social intolerance is not a reason to be moving bears back from where they came and they're not doing any harm. That's my comment.
Keith Adams, Sludge Coalition. I want to touch on a couple of things. Earlier, there was mention, Supervisor Steele mentioned that Flathead County, and I'll add on, you know, used to be Gallup County was the fastest growing in Montana, and now it's Flathead County. And I think the figure you put out was 1 or 2% per year. I think that's correct. And Flathead currently has about 108,000 people as of last year. That's only one county in the northern continental divide ecosystem. But you start multiplying those numbers by 1 or 2% growth. And then you look at, well, maybe we have 1,000 bears, maybe a little bit more in the whole ecosystem, and maybe they're growing by 2 or 3%. You know, it isn't rocket science. You just do the simple math and you go, who's really getting boxed into a corner here? And it's bears. And so that's just a general comment to go back to the statement you've been bantering around a little bit about. And I appreciate Mike Bader brought up that, you know, we used to have management situation 1 designations, which was the majority of the Flathead National Forest as an example. And that's flushed down the toilet. You know, that's gone. That's not included in the way the new forest plan was written. And so there's more area where we no longer, if we're going to err, we're going to err on the side of the bear. You know, we've shifted into this other spectrum where, you know, we're pretty much here, you know, we got people population pressures, and we're going to get into that. One other area that I think we can do a lot better in helping rein in some of this dispersed recreation is illegal mountain bike trails. I think it was Jamie Johnson that mentioned a few over in part of the territory he covers. Along the Flathead National Forest, it's just rampant. On Crane Mountain, which is the northern end of the Mission Range. Years ago, the law enforcement officer for that district, for that area, for the Forest Service, came across a bunch of illegally made trails, user-created trails. There was a stash of tools that these guys were using, so he took the tools home with him and he left his calling cards that, you know, you want your tools back, give me a call, which the guy did. And then nothing ever came of it. You know, until we did a Freedom of Information Act request and essentially embarrassed the district into the fact that they had caught this guy. He'd done an incredible network of mountain bike trails and they never fined him for it. Then they did after we made it public, and that's about the only way we could get anything accomplished. We sure asked the Forest Service to do it. But the moral of the story and where this is going to end is, so now what the Forest Service is doing in its Bug Creek project on Crane Mountain is they're authorizing and putting their blessings on 17 miles of those illegally created bike trails. So there's no disincentive for these people to go out and do this. Secondly, that same character, I personally caught him building illegal mountain bike trails in the Swan Range in the Cross Basin area to be kind of north of Crane. Took the video of him, had a conversation, if you want to call it that, out in the woods, turned it all over to the law enforcement, to the Forest Service law enforcement officer's credit. He came out within 2 days We walked those trails. This is December we were talking. So we were out there in the snow. They've still not been cited. This guy had a companion. Still haven't been cited. So, yeah, I just trying to make a point here that we have the legal avenue to nip some of this stuff in the bud and set an example that we don't tolerate this stuff. And instead, what we've got going on is that the people that are going out and building illegal trails, be they for mountain bikers or for hiking or anything else, it just happens to be this is mostly mountain bikers doing it. We're instead turning around and rewarding them for their efforts. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. I got you next. Now we'll go into the online with, who is it? Mike, online? Mike, you're off mute. You're off mute, I believe. Can you? Doesn't appear like your audio is working, Mike. We're gonna move on. Hopefully you can get that working.
Maybe have them type it in the chat.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Hey, Mike, if you can type in your question or comment in the chat, that might help because it appears like your audio is not working. Okay, so we're gonna go on.
Jeff Jewell with Friends of the Clearwater. It's very heartening for me to hear about all the efforts that people are putting out on the ground to make our American civilization more accepting of the grizzly bears whose traditional homeland we've pretty much invaded. Friends of the Clearwater's main area of focus is in the Bitterroot ecosystem. And so I just wanted to point out that the Fish and Wildlife Service has said that having a robust population in the Bitterroot ecosystem is essential for the recovery of the lower 48 population. And that gets to the idea of connectivity, which Claudia mentioned, and which I want to thank Cicely for emphasizing, that we have to emphasize connectivity with these other ecosystems. It's part of the recovery plan. It's really needed for actual biological, ecological recovery. But doing the things that Claudia mentioned, that she cited the incident of the two bears, it was discussed a lot, and we saw the presentation yesterday. The two subadult siblings who were moved out of the edge of the Bitterroot ecosystem. They're basically knocking on the door, weren't really getting into any hot conflicts, but got moved. And so if we want to emphasize connectivity, let's let connectivity work. And that's not happening when these decisions are being made. And it kind of it resonates with what I read in the Jackson Hole News yesterday about the incident about a month ago where the state of Idaho Fish and Game offed a sow and two cub grizzlies, and they weren't really getting into any really hot conflict either. And the quote that Hillary Cooley was attributed to by this reporter was that you can't really say no to the state agencies. And when there's a choice between letting them be, relocating them, killing them, or whatever, you can't really say no to the state agency. And she also said that, well, to get the quote, in terms of relocation, states don't cooperate. So with that kind of dysfunction happening within the agencies of the IGBC, I don't see much hope for recovery of the population as a whole. And it just gets back to inadequacy of the regulatory mechanisms, if that's what's going on. Thanks for your time.
We got about 2 more minutes, and then I'm okay with going an extra 5 minutes over because we did take a little bit longer internally for public comment if we want.
All right, short comment, Russ Download, Defenders Wildlife, been coming to these meetings for about 15 years, between my time with Defenders, my time with the department. I wanted to expressly thank Chris and Cecily and Jamie for your very candid comments, that are both tangible and very applicable. Very timely, so can you that you want, so very refreshing, very refreshing.
Did Mike put anything on?
Yes.
Chat?
Oh, good. He had mentioned earlier that the connectivity areas are crucial to not only NCDE grizzly bear population expansion, but more so connecting populations in the near future. That was a little earlier, and then he just put in the chat. Please see above comment. And the importance of following the interagency agreements and using the cumulative effects analysis process by subunits. Thanks. Did you get, yes, we got the earlier comment. Thank you, Mike.
Anybody else want to comment? I heard one question from Claudia on, is there a framework for how we assess the move? I don't know if any member wants to take that one on, but that was the question that I heard Claudia throw out there. Silence. I can't answer that one. Don't need to tie it up. Please looking at me confused.
I didn't understand what your question.
So the question is there, like, when we have a grizzly bear that's caught outside of the recovery area, for an example, I think Claudia, you're using the Bitterroot ecosystem, correct? How do we make the decision to then move them back? I think is where you're getting at. Is that frame up that way?
Is there some kind of framework of like checklist of things? Primarily for non-conflict bears, where you decide to, set them back.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. In every situation, we are working with the bear specialists on the ground, and Ben Jimenez is a conflict coordinator, so in that situation, he was in touch with Jamie Jungle and Bruce Montgomery, guiding the recommendation. What do we do? We've been aware of the situation for weeks following it. And so I'm not I wasn't the one on the ground, so if Jamie or Ben want to fill in, but we follow that process always and come to a decision based on the people with the knowledge on the ground. And then it's talking with Jamie, talking with Randy, us talking with the forest supervisors. And in that case, we were looking for relocation as close to where the bear was as we could find. And maybe Ben can comment on, why we ended up at the Welcome Creek site. I mean, really, that was the one that the commission had approved, but there was a lot that went into it.
Yeah, sure. Try to keep it short, I guess. Like Hillary said, we were looking for a site as close as possible where they had got to. Those bears have moved back and forth across the highway, back and forth across the river. So while they had spent time on the west side, they'd also spent time on the east. Back and forth. Some of the other sites we had worked on, Randy and I, and Jamie and I, and various Forest Service folks, were on the phone, which said for days, weeks, to figure out what our options might be. It just got to the point where the most efficient or expeditious site we could come up with that everybody could agree on was at least trying to get these bears opportunities to not become conflict there. Was this Welcome Creek. So at that point, they had not long ago been on the east side. So Welcome Creek Wilderness Relocation Site. I don't know how far that is where they had been on the east side, but it's not far. 15 miles per point. Yeah. So they were not moved back north by 90. Very clearly, we were not going to do that. We just didn't have other options at that point because a lot of this is new, frankly, we're still getting this out. But that was the one that allowed us to have a relocation site available when they were captured.
And I guess my point is like, if the bear is not causing any problems,
Yeah.
like allow it to go forward.
Yeah, so the tricky part there, and I'll let Jamie or Bruce speak to this, maybe say we're ground, but once the bear becomes a conflict bear, once the bear does do something, gets it,
I understand.
we have a lot fewer options. And so the conversation turned to, do we have an opportunity to preemptively test these things that allows us to have a lot of flexibility with what we can do? So that was the decision made, that they were just showing, their behavior was such that they were spending a lot of time in areas with a lot of attractants, and it seemed like we were just, you know, they're getting closer and closer to the point where it seemed like conflict was going to be inevitable. If they were given, you know, this was a 3-piece to move out, well, yeah, so the hope was that they were just gonna keep going. And we all, I think everybody across the board hoped that they would just keep going. They just weren't. And not saying that that makes them bad parents or anything like that, they just weren't doing it. And so at that point, it seemed that we all felt that our options were leave them be, and we all felt the chances of them becoming quote unquote conflict bears at that point was just increasing. And we just felt like there was an opportunity to try to capture them. Walk the landowners, Bruce and Jamie felt like it was a good time to try to make that move, and felt like it was the very best interest to keep them from becoming.
I appreciate that. And I also know that, especially for the state, employees, you know, there's a lot less legislation sessions, or a lot of roadblocks. You know, to maybe make a better decision, or to advance the dispersal rather than, you know, setback. But, you know, just, I kind of like to see it a process framework, checklist of considerations that be used.
And saying one last thing real quick, and so keep this quick, it'll clearly not, but, you know, that there is a lot of new moving parts to this. And so while each decision is truly important, I think we're all of us are trying to think about how do we set ourselves up for success. And so each one of these things is it's an iterative process, right? We're learning who we have to include in these conversations, all the hurdles that are going to present themselves. And I think the hope uniformly is that each time we do this, we are a little better at it. And I know that doesn't necessarily help in every single one, but again, it's the long game that we're trying to find out.
All right, I'm gonna tie it back in.
I trust you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate the comment, and I think the message heard, so, more work is what I heard to be determined. So with that, what I would like to do is go ahead and get to the adjourning. What I'll tell you as the members, we do need a new co-chair because Gary will be taking over as chair next meeting or the meeting after, I can't remember, but either way, it's coming quick. And so we've been going state, federal, so this would need to come from the federal side to stay with kind of our, I don't know if it's an agreement or charter or what, but either way, that's kind of what we've been doing is going back and forth. So any federal side of the house that wants to be co-chair, again, the commitment of your co-chair for a year, and then you become chair. That's how we've been doing it in the past. And I'm looking at Randy because it's a 2-year commitment. And so that's what we're looking at. I do want to get.
It could be federal, it could be tribal.
Yep.
We have not had a tribal representative for a while. I recommend that we get some nominations, maybe not today, but between now and our next meeting, we have a period of time there that people put in nominations.
So we can make a decision at the next meeting. Excellent. So that's what we'll probably put out. I'll put out an email for the members and see who we can get for nominations. Again, good point on the tribal side. We'll see where that goes. The other aspect, if you don't mind, let's give a big round of applause for everybody that presented. Big thank you to all the members of the public and all the other agency involvement. Again, another round of applause, please. And lastly, a big special thank you to Dylan. You guys don't know, but behind the scenes, he kind of helps out a huge amount. So really appreciate that. And then David Diamond as well. So really big thank yous to them. And then Ivy for helping out with the technical. With that, safe drives home. Really appreciate everything and enjoy, hopefully a good weekend.